All right. Hi, everyone. We'll give folks a minute to join. We'll get started at 3:30.
Hello, ladies. How are you?
Hi.
All right, my apologies for being tardy. I was stuck in another session.
No worries. We're live. So after we introduce Belkis, we will just turn our video off and do our thing. Thanks. All right, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for session 3A, Cultural Humility as a Tool for Serving Diverse Communities. As a reminder, viewers are in view only mode, so that means your screen sharing, your mic, and your video are not active. Please use the Q&A feature if you have questions for today's presenter. Please reserve any comments that you have for the chat box. As a reminder, if you're using the chat function, please select all panelists and attendees, or else all attendees will be unable to see what you said. You must attend the full session through Zoom to receive CEU credits. This session is being recorded and will be posted to our website within 1 to 2 weeks. And as a reminder, the subject matter may be sensitive. So if you need to, please step away and take time, or reach out to the room monitors using all panelists chat function, and we can provide some support for you. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Belkis Sanchez. Belkis Sanchez is a bilingual, bicultural, culturally responsible and responsive clinician. Ms. Sanchez holds a master's degree in social work and currently is a PhD candidate in social work, both degrees from Widener University. In her doctoral studies, she has dedicated her research areas around diverse communities, specifically the Latinx community, and on studying culturally appropriate and effective practices, specifically cultural humility. Ms. Sanchez has experience in individual, family, couple, and group therapy practices. Ms. Sanchez has pursued training in a wide variety of treatment modalities, including cognitive behavioral therapy, parent-child interactive therapy, motivational interviewing, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and narrative therapy. Thank you for being here with us.
All right, thank you for having me here today. I'm going to share my screen for everyone to see my presentation. Oh, I need the host to allow me to share my screen, please.
Sorry, it should be available now.
Okay. Awesome. All right, so we're going to talk today about cultural humility as a tool for serving diverse community. And as Janelle explained, I have been doing some research in reference to cultural humility, specifically more with the Latinx community. As you can all imagine, there is a lack of research as it pertains to cultural humility and direct services. So I have found a lot that has to do with other populations, and I'll share a little bit of that information that I have found. So I just want to put forward a little bit of what our agenda is for today, what you should expect from this conversation today. So I will obviously begin with introducing the topic of cultural humility first, but then I'm going to walk into talking about the macro, the meso, and the micro perspectives. Why do we need to consider a tool? So I'll be sharing a little bit of research that talks about diverse communities in general. Then we'll talk a little bit about cultural humility versus cultural competency and just why the shift, at least for me, why do I prescribe more to cultural humility versus cultural competency, which is the most known term used throughout all of our professions. And then we're going to talk a little bit about cultural humility as a tool, the way that I've envisioned it and what my research kind of has guided me to consider cultural humility as a good tool when serving diverse communities. And then lastly, we'll talk about the modality. Then I'll put forward a combined modality. So a combined, it's one modality that is already out there, however, with the cultural humility lens on it. And here are just the learning objectives of what I hope you all walk out of this conversation of today is that you will be able to understand and manage 2 to 5 key concepts that relate to culture, diversity, and cultural practices. That you're able to identify 2 to 5 personal cultural identities and how these impact your own perceptions of people or of communities. And for this objective, I usually do an activity, which because of the platform we're in, we won't be able to do the activity, but I still wanted to share the activity with you, give you the information, and then encourage you all to go back to your agencies or with your colleagues and peers and be able to do this activity at your own time. Because I think it's valuable for us to understand the different layers of cultural identity. And lastly, I would love if you all walk away with being able to identify 1 or 2 ways that you will incorporate cultural humility in your professional practices and or personal lives. And this Brendan Burchard's quote has followed me for probably 3 years now. I use it in every opportunity that I can. I think it's important for you guys as the listeners to know what my own philosophies or my own ways of thinking about things are. And this quote just kind of puts it all together for me. So the next level of growth for most people is gaining enough humility to recognize that they will need help to achieve it. And I really do believe that. I really do try to work from that perspective in both my professional worlds, but also in my personal world. I recognize that I can't do this all by myself. I recognize that I can't know everything that there is to know, and that in order for me to be able to grow and continue to be a better professional or a better mom or a better wife or just a better human being, I'm going to need others around me to help me understand how I can get better. And then before we go into some of the conversations that we're going to go into, I really wanted us to talk about the terms that I want you guys to consider or think about as I'm talking about all these different things throughout our talk. And cultural humility, the first concept that is very important for us to consider is having an interpersonal stance that is other-oriented rather than self-focused, characterized by respect and lack of superiority toward an individual's cultural background and experiences. And then when I'm thinking about, I'll say mental health providers, or I'll say therapists, or I'll use these terms kind of interchangeably. I'm thinking about us clinicians, but from this clinician humility term, I'm thinking about us as evolving, that we should be evolving, we should have evolving inclinations toward accurate self-assessment, recognition of limits, the regulation of self-centered emotions, and the cultivation of other-centered emotions in a clinical setting. So these are the concepts that are going to center kind of the rest of the conversation before we get to the tool. But it's really about just being open of others, being in a place of learning, being in a place that we understand that there's more and there's a lot of different layers to people, and therefore we are open to being informed. So I wanted to use an example to talk about the macro, the meso, and the micro perspective, and why it's important for us to consider an individual and consider all these different layers that a person is coming from. And I want to use the example of a Latinx individual. Let's say they're coming from Mexico, and maybe at the micro level, which is maybe where most of us kind of operate from, and it's more of a comfortable kind of place for us to operate from, we may consider that this individual is having depression, substance abuse issues. We can think about those things, and we can readily probably think about CBT, how we can use motivational interviewing, or how we can use other tools that are available to us to provide services to this person. However, we should really be considering also the meso and the macro aspects of this individual. We should be considering, what community does this person come from? Is it safe where they come from? Why did they come here from? What was that community like? What health agencies were available to them that maybe made them make this choice or be in the situation that they're in? And then we want to think about the macro level and how there's certain policies that are affecting this individual in reference to being able to get services, or why they had to, leave their country of origin, and how that has affected them, and how it affects them then at that micro level. And even more so, we want to consider their culture. What does their culture kind of put forward, and how does it affect them? It's not just about depression or the substance abuse issue that they're coming to our offices for. All of these layers are very important. And I think cultural humility does a really good job at instilling in us, for us to be open and allow us to learn more about all these different levels of a person. And then here I wanted to just highlight, why is it important for us to talk about a needed tool? Why would cultural humility be important for us to even consider? It's really because there's a lot of diversity in our country. We have a representation of many, many different people from many, many different countries, races. And here in this slide, I really just wanted to show that the growth of Hispanic and other populations are growing rapidly. Therefore, we need to think about these things. We need to do a better job at providing services for all of our diverse communities. So I just wanted to show that it is important and it is prevalent because there is a growth in diversity. And also that this presentation, as Janelle kind of explained in my bio, most of my research is on Latinx individuals and the concept of cultural humility and how it can be an important topic. So therefore, I am coming from that lens, and a lot of the research that I'm going to share is coming from that lens. And to your right, I hope, you are seeing the beauty of the world lies in the diversity of its people. Another one of my goals is that throughout this presentation that I instill that really it's great that we're all different. It's really great that there is diversity amongst us, and that we should embrace it. We should welcome it. And here are two more terms that I think are important when we're talking about these topics that, we probably know them well, but I think they're always important for us to bring back and talk about them and just refresh, keep them fresh in our brains. But diverse community refers to a variety of individuals unified by some elements which can be a part of an individual's culture. And then inclusion is the act of being accepting, supportive, respectful, building partnerships, valuing the differences, and being open to input. And inclusion just makes me think so much about the concept of cultural humility, of being open to the fact that there's more for me to learn, and just being okay with that, being okay that there's a lot more information out there, and allowing people to educate me, allowing people to to tell me more about what it is to be them and their experiences. And I really like this quote: diversity is the mix, while inclusion is getting the mix to work well together. And I really think we can make it work well together. And this slide is really because I don't want to not recognize that, you know, when we think about diversity, a lot of times we think about diversity only from the lens of race and ethnicity. And although that is the lens that I'm looking at things from, based on my research and what I'm doing, there's so many layers of diversity. And even amongst this room, this virtual room that we have going on right now, I know that even if there's a predominant race or a predominant ethnicity here today, there's a lot of diversity just in this room. And it doesn't only have to do with race and ethnicity. There's so many layers of diversity, and they're all important. And we should learn about all of them as much as we can. And that's where cultural humility kind of puts forward that it's okay that we don't know about all of these layers, but we should welcome it. We should open up to wanting to know more about these things. And here is a video that I thought did such a good job at kind of explaining diversity and how it plays out in different people's lives. And then it really puts forward how we can, in a culturally humble way, learn about diversity. So let's watch it and then, oh, it's
The first thing is that you are unique and there's only you on the surface of the earth. You have to know that, you have to wear that, and you have to live it. The second thing is for students to try to stop comparing their inside with other people's outside. Inside of you is, in your world, mess. But you see the outside of someone wearing a suit with a nice tie, and you think, oh, he has it all together. And that is not fair to you or to them. So do not compare your inside to other people's outside.
I guess it was the fact that everyone has a backstory. You don't really think about it. You know, I could be looking at you and talking to you, and it's like Professor Asamoah said afterwards, you know, you're only talking to someone's outer self, not their inner self, and you don't know what that inner self is. So I think just understanding that inner self that people have kind of lets you understand them and who they are a little bit better. So I think that's probably what I'm going to take away from it, that, you know, there's so much more to people than what you see.
Yeah, so when someone asks me who I am or like, you know, tell me about you, that's always the hardest thing for me to answer because it's such a basic question. But for me, it's like I have to go back and think about all the things that shape who I am, what I believe in, you know, what I do on a daily basis. And I had gone to, you know, preschool up till 11th grade, and people thought of me as like, you know, some Latina girl. They didn't know I was a Muslim. They didn't know I was part, I guess, Arab, an Arab American, I should say. So, you know, that never came up, and that wasn't a bit like prevalent in front of them. So as soon as I became, you know, I guess wearing a scarf showed people full on who I was and what I believed in and, you know, what I did. And it was different for me because, you know, I had gone to school so many years, people, you know, thought of me in whatever way they thought of me, but now it was like everything about me was in front of them, and it was scary and it was hard at first, but as soon as I realized that people still respected me, you know, people thought of that as something that was brave, even though for me it was something that I thought I should do, you know, as I grew older and, you know, I became an adult, I felt it wasn't as scary as people thought it was. And it was important because it brought up conversations like the one we had today. And people asked me questions. They asked me what it meant, what it symbolized. And that was so important to me because it meant that people weren't just automatically assuming something about me and just going on with their day. They were asking me, they were clarifying, and that was important.
I don't want to offend them by asking questions, but I realized it's not bad. In order for us to understand, we should communicate, and they won't be offended by me asking the question if I have genuine heart to know more about them. So that was one thing that I got.
But in order to begin a dialogue with the hope of changing and providing an environment where people are comfortable about talking about things, is to do it on their terms. So you don't just sneak up on them, but you make it, you empower them and provide a judgment-free environment, provide them with the opportunity where they can just be themselves and just share. And when it's conversational, when it's not something they have to take a test, they're a bit more honest. And I think it's more about us learning about each other so we can grow as a community instead of putting people in boxes.
It's important to ask questions, and it's important to break stereotypes, because stereotypes break communication and they harm society. And I think it's important to have conversations like these every single day.
Throw out the labels, ask questions, engage people, and you will learn from them more than you ever imagined. Because as you label them without asking questions, you're missing the whole important point.
Yeah, so I love that video because I really do think that it put together, one, the experience of being from diverse communities and the experience of asking others of their diverse backgrounds and what it was like to be who they were. And then it puts forward at the end, the professor does a really good job at just saying, being open, just having those conversations, just engaging with different people. It is very important, and it just it puts forward that cultural humility kind of concept that I am talking about today, because it is important for us to be open and to engage in conversations, to let them educate us. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about research on services to diverse communities. And again, I come from the lens of services being provided to Latinx individuals. I have also found a lot of research on Black African-American individuals and the fact that they've also been very underserved community. So I share a little bit about that here too. So in the National Healthcare Quality and Disparities Report in 2012, we found that Black and Latinx adults were less likely than white adults to access treatment for depression. In that same study, we see that although the gap between access for Black and white adults had decreased, for the Latinx community, it was the complete opposite. It actually increased, and it was over the same 4-year period. Another research that I think it's important, because we have a lot of misconceptions about undocumented individuals and their access to healthcare, and immigrants accessing healthcare. And this research showed that Latinx individuals, no matter what their status was, really access healthcare less. But even further, it researched the difference between undocumented and documented individuals, and undocumented individuals also access healthcare even less than immigrants in this country. And that's for various reasons. Undocumented individuals, depending on the state that they're in, there's limited services that are available to them. And immigrants in general are accessing services due to many different things, like language barriers primarily, and cultural differences, and lack of understanding of what I'm going through and why we don't access certain services. And another thing that I thought was interesting, and I've been talking about in these past 2 years, is about the experiences of American citizens like Diane Guerrero, who is a Latinx famous actress, that she did the show Orange is the New Black, but she put this book forward in 2016, and she talks about her experience as a Colombian American woman and what it was like that her parents were undocumented individuals, not by choice. They did everything that they could to become documented people, and they were deported, and she was left in this country, in Boston, by herself. And she had to live with different neighbors, different friends of the family. She had no one to take care of her. And she struggled with mental health. She struggled with depression. She had suicidal ideation. And all because mom had hired a lawyer and was on the process of getting documented, but she was asking the questions, and ICE found her. She was undocumented, and they deported them both. And this child, who's an adult now, was left here by themselves. And thankfully, worked out for her, but that's not the story of many people. And then it's important for us to also recognize implicit bias. And there's research that has been conducted on implicit bias that we all have, but this was a specific research that was discussed in reference to providers and client, and they found that healthcare providers have implicit bias directly related to minority communities. So we're talking about Black and Latinx individuals. There's definitely implicit bias, and implicit bias will affect the way that we provide our services. And last piece of research that I will share is that in this research, it concluded that 13.1% of African American and 13.4% of Latinx individuals felt discriminated against in healthcare settings. So again, and this could be because of the implicit bias, microaggressions. We could think about many different things, and the research does go into more detail about it. But there's definitely a lack of service. There's definitely a need for us to be providing a different service for the communities. And here is where we would be doing an activity. And what I'm going to do is explain it, walk you through it a little bit. And again, I encourage you all to go back to your agencies or with your peers, colleagues, to do this activity and just really look at who are we, where do we come from, and how does it impact our perspectives. And every time that I've done it, I've been surprised as how it changes, because it does. It changes because of the different environments that I'm in. It changes because of the different interactions that happen. So it changes, and that's good if it changes. It's not a bad thing as long as it's changing right in the positive direction. But it is something that I've done several times, and I encourage you all to really just look more into who are you, and how does this impact the way that you relate with others. So what we would have done was I would have had you all do this on your own first and look at, define or identify some of your cultural identities. And some are your cultural identities, but some are just your identities. And you would have included all of these here, and I'm going to show you mine next. And then I would ask you to create a pie chart, just showing how important are these. You can think about them as percentages, or just rating them numbers, however you would have wanted to. I kind of thought about them in percentage form, just to say, oh, this one represents me more, this one, and then I promote in you for you to reflect on how these different identities kind of reflect on how you interact with people, or might reflect, because they do. They definitely do, whether we want to admit to it or not. It definitely, when I consider myself a Latinx Dominican heterosexual woman. And those are all my identities, or part of my identities, because there's a few more below that you can see. But all of these do shape how I interact with other people, or shape how I understand or conceptualize different things. I'm heterosexual, so I have to know that I'm limited to what that experience is. And therefore, I need other people to inform me. I need other people to let me know what their experience is like. I don't know what it is to be a Caucasian woman. I know what it is to be a mulata woman, which is what I refer to myself as, because the country that my parents are from and that I am from, and my family is from, we are a mixture of of different cultures and races. We have Spaniard, we have African, we have Native, we have so much. And I decided I identified as a mulata. I need to do my genealogy test to really know what am I most of, but at the same time, I know that I'm a little bit of everything and I'm okay with that. And that kind of shapes the way that I see these things too, or it shapes the way that I interact with other people. And then all these other different roles too, as a mother and wife, you know, I definitely come from a family oriented perspective. And how does that play out in my practice? How does that make me think about certain things? Because it makes me think about certain things in different ways. You know, I say a faith in a higher power. And you can note that I don't say I'm Catholic, I'm not Christian, I don't say I'm Muslim, I don't say a specific religion, because that's what I believe. And how does that shape, or how does that make me conceptualize different things? And then the last three roles, researcher, professor, and social worker, these are all important roles for me. And these define me because often I find myself interacting with my colleagues, and it's really hard for me to take off my researcher hat right now because that's what I've been doing so much. So it's become part of my identity. At least for now, it's definitely a really big part of who I am and the way that I'm thinking about things. I'm asking questions all the time about stuff. So again, I need to know that these are my identities, and there's a lot more if I sit down and write them down. So again, I encourage you all to do an activity like this and just really think about how do these shape the way that you think about things or the way you interact with other people. And the last thing I'll say is that, as you can note in my pie chart, they're all pretty equally distributed. And it was because it was really hard for me right now, like to give value to one thing over the other. I really do think I'm operating from these 10 kind of arenas. And I need to know that I'm kind of living in all these worlds too. And that's another thing that was surprising for me. And then here's where we would end with the activity, is kind of just figuring out, what did you learn about yourself? I learned that those 10 things that I kind of put out there, I'm somewhat living in all 10 of them simultaneously. And it surprised me that that's where I was living, that's kind of how I was conceptualizing a lot of things for myself. And I do recognize that they impact the way that I interact with people, that they do impact my professional work with my colleagues, and that they do impact my personal life, how I interact with certain people in my life. And it's important for us to, again, do an activity like this and just reflect about who are we, and how am I putting that across? Because I'm putting it across in some way, shape, or form in all of my interactions. So now let's go into kind of the meat and bulk of the discussion. So we're going to talk a little bit about cultural competency now versus cultural humility. And cultural competency infers that through training and knowledge, one can achieve understanding of cultures and therefore provide services that are appropriate for the communities being served. So it's not a bad thing that, cultural competency puts forward that we should train, we should learn about other communities. We recognize that there's diversity. Where I personally, as a cultural humility researcher, kind of prescribe or follow cultural humility more than I do cultural competence, is because it kind of puts this notion forward that I can arrive. I can, I do this training and then I'm culturally competent. I've arrived, I've done it. And that's where, that's not the intent, I think, of cultural competence, or was the intent of cultural competence. However, it does put that notion forward. And for many practitioners, that's what they believe, that they've done the diversity courses or they've done, the diversity talks, and therefore, they're good, they're clear to go. And I don't agree with that, obviously. Now, cultural humility puts forward that we are committed to lifelong learning. We know that we have something new to learn every day. There's more out there. Even me as a Dominican woman, knowing a lot about my history and my culture, I still don't know everything that there is to know about being a Dominican woman. One, I don't live there, so I don't know what the experience is of living in the Dominican Republic. Two, I'm from one part of the country, a very small part of the country, so I don't know what it is to be from all the different parts of the country. So again, I need to acknowledge that and understand that there's so much more. So I have to be committed to learning, to just being informed, learning about the different communities and cultures that are out there. And I need to constantly self-reflect too. I need to constantly um, do that self-reflection that, oh, you know what, I have this Dominican, maybe I don't know everything that there is to know about this person. Maybe I need to learn more about it, or how can I learn more about it? What should I be asking? What should be different in our services? And I need to reflect on that. I need to do that ongoing work. It's not a one time and done. Cultural humility also puts forward that we're aware of power dynamics and we encourage power balance, the balance of powers. We really want to acknowledge that, there is dynamics of powers. There are communities that are more empowered than others. There is differences, like in my role as an educator and my students, like that's a power dynamic. And I want to be aware that in my role as a professor, I hold a level of power, and then I want to encourage balancing that power. Doesn't mean that, they disrespect me as the professor, but it means that I put forward this idea or this notion that this is a collaborative process. I want to teach them something, but I want them to learn something. Therefore, I need to know where they're at. I need to engage in a conversation with them and make it into a more collaborative, and therefore kind of eliminating that power difference and balancing it out as much as possible. And then the other part that I think is probably the most difficult for all of us to do as professionals that have struggled. And, we did this master, we got our licenses, we did so much work to be in the positions that we are today. And cultural humility puts forward that we relinquish the role of being an expert. And really that comes from the stance that cultural humility really believes that although I may be an expert in providing services and all these things that I'm trained in, and I might be really well equipped to provide services for people with depression, doesn't mean that I'm an expert in their lives. And that's the really key part of relinquishing the role. We're not relinquishing knowing what we know and all the efforts and all the work that we've done to be certified trainers in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, for example. No, I can still claim that expertise, or claim, being effective in these things, or knowing these tools. I can claim that, sure. However, I need to acknowledge that although TFCBT puts forward this, there's more to that person. There's more, and that's what I'm relinquishing, thinking that my TFCBT skills are going to fix this person or are going to make things better for this person. That really this person brings their experiences, and those are very valuable. Just looking at the time to make sure that I cover everything that I have. And then here I just wanted to show kind of, because I don't want it to be that I'm just saying, no, cultural competency. I prescribe to cultural humility. I do follow cultural humility. I do think cultural humility does a great job at kind of putting forward a good modality for us to follow. And I encourage you all to follow it. But I really wanted to show here that, they do relate. They are united in some ways. And the two ways that they're mostly united in is that both of these concepts acknowledge that there's layers of cultural identities, that there's so much more that we need to learn. And it puts forward that it is on us, the providers, the counselors, the social workers, whatever capacity that we're in, it is on us to do that job, to do that work, to find out more, to really learn more. And here, I really love this graph. When I saw it, I was like, oh, I want to share it because I thought it was, it just hit everything, or kind of put everything that cultural humility puts forward kind of together. And, using this word cultural safety, I thought was was just really important, because really that's what I want to work towards, honestly, myself. I want to work towards a culturally safe world. That might be too big of a task, but I do want to see that we are providing services from a culturally safe perspective, that our clients are able to come to our offices and really feel like, you know, we're aware of culture, we're sensitive to their culture, that we do the work that we need to do in reference to cultural competency. You know, we get the trainings, we read the books, we learn about the communities that we're serving, and then that we stay in this cultural humility stance, where we know there's more to know, where we are open to learning more, where we're reflecting on what we could do better, what we could do differently, and that we continuously promote that cultural safety. And before we get to the model, I just wanted to highlight a few research that have been done on cultural humility that show that cultural humility can really help in this situation. It can really help in us providing better services. So one study from Mosher, Hook, and the rest of these gentlemen, cultural humility is strongly associated with Therapy Alliance. So, or we can think about therapy rapport. You know, we're always thinking about how we should be, you know, building this relationship with our clients, and having a good rapport. And we know that without a good rapport, you know, they're not really going to buy into anything. We're not really going to move forward in services. And this research shows that cultural humility really is strongly associated with that with being able to build that therapy alliance. Cultural humility helps therapists to recover from cultural mistakes. So, and this one is important, and I wanted to highlight because I'm not saying that we're not going to have cultural mistakes. I probably have had my share few of them, you know, even after being exposed to this information and really, you know, living in this cultural humility world. I probably still have done these cultural mistakes. However, cultural humility, you know, coming from that concept will help with recovering, because we can acknowledge and we can admit to having those cultural mistakes, and we can say, I'm sorry, I did this, or I said this. How could I have said that better? And the last research on cultural humility that I will share is that reports of therapists' low cultural humility is actually associated with therapists committing cultural mistakes or microaggressions. So this was a study that was done where therapists' cultural humility was measured, and it really showed that from the client's perspective that a lot of cultural mistakes were committed, or there was microaggression sort of dynamics that happened. And again, this happens not on purpose, but it happens if we do not do activities like the one that I presented before, and we really just, you know, reflect and think about, where am I coming from? How do I present myself? And just living in this cultural humility kind of stance of being open to learning more or accepting feedback, which then leads me to our model soon. It's coming up. So cultural humility. So these are the cultural humility principles, and I'm going to speed it up just a tiny bit. But cultural humility principles. So we commit to lifelong learning, you know, and we critically self-reflect. Like, we are constantly thinking about what I could have done better. What do I not know about? You know, when I have a different person or any person really in front of me, you know, what are cultural things that I need to consider about this person? Just like I kind of put in the first one of the first slides, I'm thinking about the micro, macro, and meso kind of levels. We have a desire to fix power imbalances within provider-client dynamics. We want our clients to understand what we can offer to them, but we want them also to know, and we want them to feel empowered, that it's really about them and that the service that I'm giving is for them. And they're an expert in their lives, and I need them in order for me to be able to help them. So it's an us thing. It is not, I'm here and I'm going to help you and they're here. It is definitely a collaborative sort of way. And then we do strive to hold institutions accountable, and we promote mutual respect, partnerships based on trust. And here we are, the tool that I kind of put forward, or that I've been thinking about, or that I kind of follow. So this model that you see in front of you, it is a model from Miller, Hubel, and Duncan. They came up with the cycle of excellence, and that's what this is. This is the cycle of excellence. So in the cycle of excellence, we want to determine a baseline of effectiveness. I want to know, what am I good at? What have I done good? Like how many of my clients, I say that I'm a depression expert, which I'm not, but just using it as an example, but I'm a depression expert. And so then what I want to know is how many of the clients that I provided services to that have had depression, how many of them have gotten better? I want a baseline, or have not gotten better. Like I really need to know what is that information. And then I want to obtain feedback from my clients that have received this service from me. And what does that look like? I said that all these people got better, but what do they say? What's the feedback? What did help them, or what didn't help them? Then I want to get that feedback. And then I want to engage in deliberate practice. I want to, given what what the baseline is, given the feedback that I've gotten, then I want to, train more, or change some of the behaviors that I've been told that will promote more excellence in my services. And here I show you how we need humility in order to be able to engage in this cycle of excellence. So we need the humility to welcome the data. It's scary to hear, how many clients didn't get better, and how many of us might admit to the fact that we don't necessarily do that. We don't necessarily evaluate how many of my clients have really gotten better, and how have they gotten better. We don't really look at that. So we need the humility to welcome that data, to welcome what is that baseline. I say I'm a depression expert, but how many of my clients have really gotten better? How soon have they gotten better? We might want to look into it a little deeper, really evaluate it more. And then we need humility to receive the feedback of the client's progress. Like we need humility to be open to wanting to hear these things, even difficult things. Like, what, Belkis, you actually offended me when you said this. And how do you engage in that conversation? And how do you recover from that? But you need that humility to receive that feedback, to hear those things. And then lastly, to be able to engage in deliberate practice, again, we need humility. We need to reflect. We need to review. And we need to engage in those trainings. We need to engage more and more on what these trainings would look like, and what are the things that I could have done better or differently, receiving that feedback, and then kind of reflecting, well, you know what, I could see how that wasn't that good. And here's a tool that is from Dr. Hook. He's one of the leading researchers on cultural humility. I encourage you to look into his books, he has a website, and this assessment is available, the scale is available as long as it is not being used for commercial use. He allows it to be used, which is why it's here on our presentation, and I wanted to share it with you all. But this could be used in a survey format in our agencies, where we really get some information from the clients that we're providing services to on how we're really doing, on, have I been respectful? Was I open to explore? How important were the access of cultural background to them? And, did I actually, touch on those, or was that missing in our interactions with our clients? And did that affect then their treatment effectiveness, and all of that? So this is a tool, and I think we might be able to make the link available to you all. And then I always think that we can't talk about models without also sharing a little bit about evidence-based practice. So this is my attempt to just say there is research out there that kind of questions the use or the modification or the adaptability of certain models that are evidence-based. You know, they've done the research, they've shown or proven that this model is effective. But then there's research out there that is it effective for all of us? You know, is it encompassing of all communities, of all racial and ethnic people that are represented here in the United States? And generally the answer to that is no. Although evidence-based practices do a good job or attempt to include how did they consider cultural things when they were developing their evidence-based practice models. And what I'm putting forward here is that cultural humility might be a good tool when we're thinking about very specific models and how to use it. The other thing I want to put forward here, which I kind of already mentioned, but I want to make sure that I'm clear, is that evidence-based practices, there's a lot of research that goes into it to make these models become, evidence-based practices and models that we all get trained in and follow. However, I want you guys to really think about, and when you look at these evidence-based practices that you kind of sign up for and that you say, oh, this is the practice that I'm following, to really look at it from a critical lens and think, wait a minute, I serve the Latinx community. I only saw that there was 3 people in this research. So does it really represent, and then maybe consider cultural humility as a tool that you might use while facilitating this model? Not that you shouldn't follow the model to the T, because it's proven to be effective for whatever the diagnosis may be. However, maybe with cultural humility together, you might be able to provide a more culturally appropriate service. And I think we're towards the end. So lastly, there's 2 more slides, I think. So lastly, this, future research is definitely needed. And for those of you in the room that like to do research, these are just some things that I have found that we need to continue to research. We need to look at, would cultural humility help in the African American communities? And really, would it help in a lot of different diverse communities? We could think about this, again, when you think about the diversity dimensions graph, we could think about it in many different ways. We need to know more about treatment effectiveness when serving Latinx clients. And lastly, I do think we need to do more research on cultural humility and the fidelity to evidence-based practices. And this is definitely the last one. So lastly, I wanted to kind of share some healthy practices that I think encourage humility and also would help with just providing and continuing to provide services to the diverse communities that we probably all provide services to, or that we're looking into providing services to. Be curious, learn more about other people, travel if you can, or if not, go to local restaurants, go to museums that have things about different people, and learn about those histories, learn about people's music, people's foods, and what their beliefs are. Push yourself out of your comfort zone and get to know different people. If your group of friends or your group where you work is homogeneous, maybe get out of that group and reach out outside of those groups and learn about different people so that we can break those stereotypes that were mentioned in the video. And look at others' richness in their history and their culture. There's so much richness in other people's cultures, and it's just fascinating to be able to learn about different people and be able to value them a little bit more. Learn about other belief systems. This one's always one that, I know it feels challenging, but it's okay to learn about other people's belief systems. Doesn't mean that you have to adopt them for yourself. It doesn't mean that you have to believe them, but it's okay to learn why other people believe what they believe in. And then, be able to kind of bridge those gaps or close those gaps in some ways. And then lastly, I just think all humans, no race, no ethnicity or social group is or nor should be viewed as better. We're all beautiful human beings, and we all have strengths and things that we contribute to our world. And therefore, I encourage you to, again, learn about other people, get out of your comfort zone and just meet your neighbors, meet the different peoples that are out there, and really come from this stance of welcoming and creating a more safe environment for all people in our world. These resources will be shared with you. Thank you for allowing me to talk to you all, and I hope you all enjoyed this talk today. And I guess we might have some time for some questions.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we have time for one question. Does your research address how diversity is presented and responded to at HBCUs versus PWIs?
No, it does not. That would be another research that I would encourage others to do. So my research is really focusing right now. I'm doing my research on cultural humility as a tool for the Latinx community specifically. But I haven't seen anything on those things, but it would be a fascinating research that we should do.
Great, thank you. So as a reminder, the closing remarks start at 4:30. I'm going to put the link did not work. Let's see. Okay, for some reason the link is not working.